Jean Baudrillard, in his book Simulacra and Simulation, writes the following within the subchapter called The Divine Irreverence of Images. To dissimulate is to pretend to have what one has. To simulate is to feign to have what one doesn't have. One implies a presence, the other an absence. But it is more complicated than that, because simulating is not pretending. Whoever fakes an illness can simply stay in bed and make everyone believe he is ill. Whoever simulates an illness produces some of the symptoms. Therefore, pretending or dissimulating leaves the principle of reality intact. The difference is always clear, it is simply masked. Whereas simulation threatens the difference between the true and the false, the real and the imaginary. Is the simulator sick or not, given that he produces true symptoms? Objectively, one cannot treat him as being either ill or not ill. Psychology and medicine stop at this point, forestalled by the illness's henceforth undiscoverable truth. End quote. You could therefore say that the simulation is more real than the real, in the sense that it makes an addition to our existing reality of life, and in so doing, creates its own paradigm whereby the principles of reality don't apply to the simulation itself. The first principles are instead threatened by the simulation. Thus, our ability to comprehend and discover what is true, false and real becomes, in a sense, undiscoverable through the simulation's lens. This shows in our modern world the insidious power that simulation brings about via the production of what you could call ultimate confusion within the world. Because the simulation's paradigm has the ability to either subvert or recreate a new grand narrative for our society, depending on the simulation's effective power to infiltrate the meta-narrative of life. An exemplary example of the seductive power found within simulation can be seen by the pseudoscience created and perpetuated by the false predictions of pandemic computer modelling. To quote Tassanet.com from the following article, a British academic programmed a computer model that output 2.2 million Americans to die from the virus, along with 500,000 British. This computer model started the panic, followed by computer models done by university PhDs in America predicting deaths from 1.2 million to 800,000 Americans. When these computer models were wrong, when the actual deaths occurring did not match the predictions, the computer models were reprogrammed to show a smaller number of projected deaths. These projected deaths were again wrong, and the computer models were reprogrammed again to show even smaller numbers of projected deaths. Computer models are a hidden secret science programmed by anyone with all or part of the underlying raw data and algorithms used to program those computer models hidden from scrutiny. The lack of transparency by the computer model programs begs for the demand to show their work, show their algorithms and show all of the underlying raw data that they use to program these computer models, so that all of this can be validated by other scientists. As of now, no one has seen the raw data and algorithms that we use to program the British computer model for the virus. No one has seen the raw underlying data and algorithms that we use to program the American computer models for the virus. Are the virus computer models that erroneously output predictions of mass deaths fraudulently constructed? End quote. This demonstrates the sheer power of simulation and their influential, destructive power for the bad or good effect it can have on any societal structure or meta-narrative within society. It was of course that which was the primary influencer and what you could call fraudulent justifier to lock down, if I may say, which perpetuated the collapse of general living and society. What was seemingly intended to be a trusted prediction of what could be none other than a fraudulent construction by the likes of Neil Ferguson and others, whose work in Imperial College London was funded by none other than Bill Gates. When the simulation forwards a narrative that is beyond our reality of nature, the simulacra has to be proven and identified by a method which expresses the ability to have no obligation to meaningful precision or rule, to be instead unreliable and one of open-ended interpretation, all in the purpose of there being no barriers in the way of applying the simulation into reality, all for the sake of gaining more insidious so-called proof than need be, and to then further the intentions of authority towards the so-called new normal. This is what Kary Mullis, the inventor of the PCR test, meant when talking about the misuse of its results, that when done well, due to the process of amplification, it allows you to identify nearly anything and anyone, to make a minuscule amount measurable, misidentify it as important and diagnose on that basis, and due to this ability, amplifies the belief in the Buddhist perspective of Atman and Brahman, totality and oneness, that everything exists in everyone. In other words, a very deceptive way, if done, to increase the infection rates beyond the necessary limit of real meaning for the sake of continuing the desired narrative.
I want to ask this to Kary. How do they misuse PCR to estimate all these supposed free viral RNAs that may or may not be there?
I think misuse PCR is not quite. I don't think you can misuse PCR. Actually, no, the results, the interpretation of it. See, if you can say, if they could find this virus in you at all, and with PCR, if you do it well, you can find almost anything in anybody. It starts making you believe in the sort of Buddhist notion that everything is contained in everything else, right? I mean, because if you can amplify one single molecule up to something that you can really measure, which PCR can do, then there's just very few molecules that you don't have at least one single one of them in your body, okay? So that could be thought of as a misuse of it, just to claim that it's meaningful. But the real misuse of it is that you don't need to test for HIV. You don't need to test for the other 10,000 retroviruses that are unnamed, also in the subject. See, somebody that's got HIV generally is going to have almost anything that you can test for, because they have definitely been. HIV is a fairly rare virus. There's only 1 million of us out of 250, 300 million people in America that have that virus. So you have to get around. Either your mother had to have it and pass it to you, or you have to really be paying a lot of attention to people that do have it and paying only attention to them and get a pretty good chance of getting it that way. It's hard to get it, but if you have it, there's a good chance you've also got a lot of other ones, because you've been in the market for them. It's been possible for you to get a lot of. To test for that one and say that has any special meaning is what I think is the problem. Not that PCR has been misused. It's like. It's not an estimation. No, it's a really quantitative thing. It tells you something about nature and about what's there, but it allows you to take a very minuscule amount of anything and make it measurable, and then talk about it in meetings and stuff like it is important. See, that's not a misuse. That's just sort of a misinterpretation.
Even after all these PCR, this quantitative PCR, that if you just get down to a basic virological count, it's still 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 10,000. HIV in 1 to 1 in 1,000, 1 in 500 to 1 in 1,000 T cells.
It is. No, there's very little of what they call HIV, and what's been brought out here by Phil Pott and Isai already. The measurement for it is not exact at all. It's not as good as our measurement for things like apples. An apple is an apple. You know, you can get something that's kind of like, if you got enough things that look kind of like an apple and you stick them all together, you might think it's an apple. But and HIV is like that. Those tests are all based on things that are invisible, and the results are inferred in a sense. PCR is separate from that. It's just a process that's used to make a whole lot of something out of something. That's what
Also,
it is. But it's not. It doesn't tell you that you're sick, and it doesn't tell you that the thing you ended up with really was going to hurt you or anything like that. That's what it's not.
So even if you believe in HIV, it can't tell the difference between virus particles or active live virus. I mean, there's a lot of questions involved in this.
Mm-hmm.
Guys, thank you very, very much. I don't know what else I can say, but to let you know that we will hold more events where people can get together.
What is it? What is it about humanity that wants to go to all the details and stuff and listen? You know, these guys like Fauci get up there and start talking. You know, he doesn't know anything really about anything, and I'd say that to his face. Nothing. The man thinks you can take a blood sample and stick it in an electron microscope, and if it's got a virus in there, you'll know it. He doesn't understand electron microscopy, and he doesn't understand medicine, and he should not be in a position like he's in. Most of those guys up there on the top are just total administrative people, and they don't know anything about what's going on at the bottom. You know, those guys have got an agenda, which is not what we would like them to have, being that we pay for them to take care of our health in some way. They've got a personal kind of agenda. They make up their own rules as they go. They change them when they want to, and they smugly, like Tony Fauci, does not mind going on television in front of the people that pay his salary and lie directly into the camera. You can't expect the sheep to really respect the best and the brightest. They don't know the difference, really. I mean, I like humans. Don't get me wrong, but basically, the vast majority of them do not possess the ability to judge who is and who isn't a really good scientist. I mean, that's a problem. That's a main problem, actually, with science, I'd say, in this century, because science is being judged by people. Funding is being done by people who don't understand it. Okay, who do we trust? Fauci? Fauci doesn't know enough to, you know. If Fauci wants to get on television with somebody who knows a little bit about this stuff and debate him, he could easily do it, because he's been asked. I mean, I've had a lot of people, president of the University of South Carolina asked Fauci if he'd come down there and debate me on the stage in front of the student body, because I wanted somebody who was from the other side to come down there and balance my, because I felt like, well, these guys can listen to me, but I need to have somebody else down here that's going to tell me the other side. But Fauci didn't want to do it.
The obvious ambiguity realized from this method of testing not only reinstates the Buddhist conception, as Muller states, but as a primary negative reinforces the hypochondria embedded within it unconsciously in relation to you and everyone else, which further develops the fear and anxiety that you have towards other people, castrating you from the world, destroying society and life itself in the process, all produced under the untold knowledge of how this testing system can be easily misinterpreted for inaccurate testing and diagnosis, leading to fright.
It's not an estimation. No, it's a really quantitative thing. It tells you something about nature and about what's there, but it allows you to take a very minuscule amount of anything and make it measurable, and then talk about it in meetings and stuff like it is important.
Carl Jung writes the following in his book Ion on the chapter called The Self. But actually, one has acquired nothing more than its name. Despite the age-old prejudice that the name magically represents the thing, and that it is sufficient to pronounce the name in order to posit the thing's existence. In the course of the millennia, the reasoning mind has been given every opportunity to see through the futility of this conceit. But that has done nothing to prevent the intellectual mastery of a thing from being accepted at its face value. It is precisely our experiences in psychology which demonstrate as plainly as could be wished that the intellectual grasp of a psychological fact produces no more than a concept of it, and that a concept is no more than a name, a flaccus vocus. The intellectual counters can be bandied about easily enough. They pass lightly from hand to hand, for they have no weight or substance. They sound full but are hollow, and though purported to designate a heavy task and obligation, they commit us to nothing. The intellect is undeniably useful in its field, but it is a great cheat and illusionist outside of it whenever it tries to manipulate values." End quote. Through the process of this entire event, the psychological keys to manipulate values have been cut and given to those of the intellectual language barrier, and is in return given its own shield of protection to the fact that the undiscoverable truth cannot be found from the outside of its own restrictive domains. As Jung previously writes, as I just said in the quote, the intellectual can be a great cheat and illusionist whenever it tries to manipulate values. This is especially obvious when the manipulation of those values are contorted to precede a destined support and appearance for a newly made economic structure that awaits in the shadows. The associated values towards the function of thought, feeling and action can inevitably be successfully manipulated through the masses by a means which affects all life and living human action. The extremely eerie and dangerous question of articles such as this published by MSN.com called "This Overlooked Variable is the Key to the Pandemic" sows a silent seed in raising the extremely dangerous question of a certain type of people being a super emitter, as they say, of the virus is beyond worrying, especially in how the question has the potential in igniting psychological projection and radicalized scapegoating within the minds of many, while within the continuous desperation for pandemic escape. It writes the following: "Tuberculosis was thought to be spread by close-range droplets until an ingenious set of experiments proved that it was airborne. Much is still unknown about the superspreading of SARS-CoV-2. It might be that some people are super emitters of the virus, in that they spread it a lot more than other people." End quote. This dangerous question has the potential, if led further by dangerous seekers, to confront the existence of individual moral law, ethics, and inalienable rights under desperating forces for further collective control. Shockingly enough, this type of horrifying reality was one of the main methods used to perpetrate the Jews during World War II. Hitler disgustingly marked the Jews as radical carriers and spreaders of tuberculosis, or TB, and used this as a horrifying justification for their public humiliation and eventual mass extermination. In other words, using tuberculosis unscientifically as a concept of language for the mass extinction of Jews. In other words, what you could call a simulation of perverted reality. A simulation which took over the principles of reality themselves as we know it, and through its power nullified all possible techniques for truth or discovery of truth through propaganda and deceit, whereby the overbearing reign of Hitler's simulation made all truth undiscoverable.